Morgan is a frequent collaborator for us, but he's also won the Academy Award for Best Documentary in 2014 for 20 Feet from Stardom. And he's now directed Best of Enemies, which is in theaters now.
Right now. Go see it.
And it's just a great pleasure to have you here.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
So today, what I thought we'd start by talking about, and we're going to make sure that we leave ample question and answer period for the end, because you guys might just want to find out what it's like to hold an Oscar, right?
Heavy. It's very heavy. Yeah.
I thought what we do, the general spine of what we'll talk about is the nature of documentary filmmaking, and then how that wraps around to applying your skills in that area to marketing video, to what some people call marketing vidocs, or I've heard them called documercials. But before we launch into that, why don't we give everybody a little look at some of the work that you've done before so that we can have a sense of your techniques, as it were.
Seeing background remains I suppose, a somewhat unheralded position, you know.
There's a power to these women that stand on stage with these guys.
It's a bit of a walk. That walk to the front is as complicated.
You trumpet here. How would you logically not have a diva have her music on? I don't get that.
The rock and roll people like Bruce and Elton John and Steve wanted to know who that girl singer was. My life has been all about trying to make a success of the gift that I had.
She was like the really hot one of our kids. She was very hot. Beautiful girl.
I don't set out to be the sex symbol.
But you post in Playboy.
Gore told me he hired a researcher. He wanted to paint National Review as being racist, if he could, anti-Semitic.
I don't think he was really interested in conducting a debate about the issues, or about the parties, or about the policies, or about the platforms of the two parties. What he wanted to do was to expose the bucket.
Their confrontation is about lifestyle. What kind of people should we be? Their real argument in front of the public is who is the better person.
So I should have set that up a little better, but that's the Best of Enemies, the last film, is the one that's in theaters now, which is about the rivalry and the televised debates between William F. Buckley, a famous conservative, and Gore Vidal, a famous liberal radical thinker. And anyway, so two very different projects. Both films about divas, though, in their own way. So,
Well, let's cut to the quick.
Yeah.
What makes a great documentary? You've been doing it a long time.
Same thing that makes a great film: story and character. You know, it's people think of documentaries being some other creature, but it obeys the same rules as all filmmaking, which is you have to have a great story or a great character, or ideally both. You know, but essentially that's what it comes down to. It's a completely different process, though, because when you are making a Hollywood movie, you write a script and then you shoot a movie. When you make a documentary, you shoot a movie and then you write a script. And I know just from having worked with you on this and with other agencies, this makes agencies very uncomfortable when you enter this realm. And what you learn doing this for 20 years is that leap off the cliff, you're going to land. You know, that you know enough about what you're doing that you know you have the right pieces, and you may not know how it's going to fall together, but you know you're going to get there. And there's something that happens when you let the story speak for itself that's unscripted, that is the magic that is documentary. And the more you try and make people say what you want them to say, and everybody's probably had this experience, the worse it comes out. You know, it's like interviewing a hostile witness, or you know, on the stand. You know, and I'm much more interested in the things you don't expect. You know, that I I prefer, as an interviewer, to not ask questions I know the answer to. And I think people being interviewed like to feel like the interviewer is actually trying to learn something. And being willing to follow the tangents. I can't tell you how many times I thought a film was about one thing or an interview was about one thing, and you end up on this totally random tangent. And I've even had the experience of somebody telling me some incredible tangent when I'm making a film, and then I find myself telling people about it at dinner. And then I realize, well, if it's interesting enough for me to be telling somebody about it at dinner, maybe it's not a tangent. Maybe it is the story. And I think being willing to, you go in with a plan and a map and a treatment for a film, but at the end of the day, when you get to the edit bay, it's making the best film with the footage you have. So you have to be free enough to throw away that map and start anew, in a way. And the other thing, there was a famous Alfred Hitchcock quote where he said, in Hollywood films, God is the director, but in documentary films, the director is God. No, did I get that backwards? No, Hollywood films, the director is God in Hollywood films, and God is the director in documentaries, because you have no real control over it. So it's kind of that giving up of control that makes people nervous, but it's where the best stuff comes from.
Yeah, and I think we'll talk a little bit about finding ways around that, technically, because I know we've worked really hard on that with some of the stuff we worked on together. In the vein of asking questions that you don't know the answer to, and putting people on the spot. So we also live kind of in the age of DSLR cameras, and the specs are getting better on every phone and device that we get. So, and in a way, ironically, a lot of the shorter format media that we're talking about today, if you think about what Periscope is or Instagram, it's kind of a documentary format. I mean, they're all making documentaries. So but you've been doing this for a couple of decades now, more. What is the difference between sending out your smartest intern and sending out somebody like Werner Herzog or you or Doug Prey?
A number of things, I should hope. And certainly the ease of technology has made a huge difference. And there are films that are happening. I see documentaries all the time that only have happened because of the technology. That somebody happened to have a camera there at the right moment, or the ease of being able to shoot now cheaply has made that much easier. I mean, even starting back with films like Startup.com. Citizen4, though, she could afford a camera. But just the idea that people now are starting to shoot stuff not knowing if it's a catfish is another one, whether or not, I don't know how scripted all that is. But
Docu-kinda-y.
Yeah, but that there are seeds of things that people can now start shooting, and they may become documentaries, they may not. And there are interesting films that way. I think the thing that lets people make interesting films over and over is understanding how to put a film together, but also a big part of it, which people don't talk that much about, is the rapport with the subject. And I think that's a huge part of it. Most documentaries are not verite documentaries, the kind of Frederick Weissman style, fly on the wall, just hanging back and letting stuff happen. You're dealing with your subjects, you're trying to get them to open up, you're building trust, and you're interviewing them, and these relationships can take years and years and years to develop. And that is kind of the key part of it. In almost every film I've done, you kind of get, it could happen early, it can happen late, but there's a moment where your subject just kind of relaxes and says, okay, I know I've been telling you what you want to hear, or I've been giving you the usual line of BS I'm used to giving, but okay, I'm just going to be myself. And you just strive for that moment. And that, I think that's actually true that's really true with acting, with directing actors, directing real people for commercial content, or directing people for documentaries. Yeah.
And I've literally heard people that we've worked with call you a story whisperer. Bringing out stuff that they didn't know was in them. Yeah. And I can tell you, it also, I'll tell you a secret for all the people that are sitting on this side of the room, which is that as marketing teams, it doesn't hurt to have the guy who won the Academy Award on the roster for telling your story, telling your brand story.
But to me, the key to being a good interviewer or to being a good documentarian or dealing with a real subject is just being genuinely curious. You know, that if you actually want to hear what a person has to say, and you're less worried about where it's going and more like you're having a really good dinner party conversation with somebody, and you're willing to kind of follow these tangents and ask dumb questions and get them to explain things and get them to kind of, particularly, I mean, I've done a lot of interviewing with people who have been interviewed many, many times too. And trying to get somebody to say, okay, well, this is not the interview I've done 100 times before. This is totally different. You know, how do I get beyond that? And part of that is just being really engaged. I mean, I think being curious is the #1 attribute you need to have to be a documentary filmmaker. But it's how you come up with the interesting stuff. I mean, it's all about trying to find out what interests you as a storyteller and then just sharing that in the film.
Right. You know, Clorox calls, and Gary and I call you up and go, hey, you know, Clorox really wants to make something that makes them feel like they're part of the family. Would you like to do a documentary on bleach? Like, how do you get excited about that? Or do you?
I think you can get excited about anything. I mean, I'm one of those believers that if you, every day when I open the paper, and I've kind of done this as an exercise with people, and I've taught classes on this too, I'll go through the paper and we'll talk about how to make a documentary out of every story on the front page of the New York Times. You know, I'm really a believer that, you know, everybody has a story. There's stories everywhere. It's just figuring out the angle into them. And, you know, what's the thing that's interesting about them? I'm interested in bleach, you know. There are all kinds of things about, you know, the world that company comes from, the world those individuals come from, you know, who are the characters there, what does it say about our country, and what does the need for bleach say about how we like to look in our society versus other countries? Or, you know, there are all kinds of different ways of starting to think about a topic and thinking, you know, what's interesting about this? You know, I'm one of those people who believes there's, you know, when people say, oh, I need to think of an idea for my next documentary, I mean, I'm the opposite. I've got 1,000 ideas. You know, I just don't have enough years to make them all. But I feel like there's never a shortage of interesting ideas. And so, I mean, part of what's so great about doing branded content or commercials is, as a documentary filmmaker, you get a really awesome sandbox to play in. So, and really, some of the things, you know, the Keith Richards project was one of those that I don't think I would have done it had I not done some commercial work first. So we shot it on anamorphic prime lenses. Igor Martinovich, who shoots House of Cards, was the DP. You know, shooting a documentary on anamorphic primes and all, you know, this is something that would have intimidated me before I got to really spend a lot of time playing with them on commercial work and then bring that back into my documentary work. So I think it's just a great way of flexing different muscles that you don't get to otherwise.
And, you know, I want to make sure that we leave some time for questions and answers at the end. I just glimpsed at my phone and was like, okay, this is really fun, and now I've killed all our time. So let's take a look at both of the next two clips in a row. I want to show the piece of work that you did for Bose.
Yeah, I've done a few different pieces for Bose. I did a long-form piece and a 50th anniversary piece, and I think this is just like a short Bose history spot.
And then we'll roll right into the second piece, which is one of the ones that we've worked on together for Microsoft HoloLens.
Great.
You'll never make any more progress than what you can imagine. It was Albert Schweitzer who said, what is bad is not that man lives and dies, but what dies within man while he lives. The most important thing that dies within man while he lives is his imagination. The thing that keeps you creative is to never lose your imagination, always dream of things that are better and think about ways to reach those things.
When you think about how you experience technology today, it's like behind this glass screen. You've unlocked the screen.
really what we're trying to do is break down the walls between technology and people.
This is the next generation of computing. This is the next PC.
A hologram is made out of light, which ultimately allowed us to port digital assets over the real world so that humans can essentially be entertained and be empowered to do things in brand new ways.
That was science fiction, and now we're bringing it into science fact.
This is by far, far, far the hardest and most intriguing thing I've ever done in my life.
When the other perspectives come to it, and all the creatives out there, it's gonna blow our minds.
This is a new medium we've just never had before.
This is truly about seeing the world in a whole different way.
So,
Thanks.
Microsoft is obviously being very careful about how they roll this product out to the world, but I don't think I will be, or either one of us will be disappeared if I share that this is kind of the tip of the spear, that Morgan is working on a number of different pieces of this project, and I'd like to hear what's unique about it and about the workflow that we've evolved together. Maybe coming back to that question you mentioned about the discomfort of some marketers about the possibility that when they let you into the hen house, you're going to actually find a story that is not a story that they want to tell. These guys know very clearly the story that they want to tell.
They do. I mean, it's been such an interesting experience. We came on to the Microsoft Hololens project about 9 months ago, and it was 3 months before announce. Nobody within the company really knew about it. It was top secret within Microsoft. And we signed on to the project not even really knowing what it was. Yeah. We had a taste, but the first moment we sat down with Alex Kipman, who's really the inventor of HoloLens, and he was so smart and brilliant, charming, philosophical, talking about art history, talking about philosophy. At the end of that 1 hour meeting, I said, I could make a whole film about this guy.
I remember I said, he walked out of the room and I said, that was like talking to Steve Jobs. And you said, I think it was like talking to Jesus.
He kind of looks like Jesus too, which helps. So we've done a bunch of short videos. We're in the process of doing that. I know, again, it's all part of trust. I know the marketing people might get a little nervous about things, but I think they've been incredibly happy with how things have turned out. And I guess it's not telling stories out of school to talk about the other project we're doing them that kind of grew out of the short videos we're doing, which is Microsoft said, well, if you're doing all these short pieces, why don't you do a documentary about the 5-year journey to create HoloLens? And so they commissioned us to do a long-form documentary, which has been interesting. And on top of that, they said, and we want you to do exactly the film you want. Marketing's not going to weigh in on this, so it's just for you.
We'll see about that.
Yeah, but at least right now, they said up front, give us exactly what your take is on this. And so we've been working on that on top of everything else, which has been really interesting. And really, when you get down to the HoloLens story, is a story of brilliant people. I mean, these guys who were in the gaming department of Xbox who came up with this crazy idea and did it kind of under the radar. And it's interesting to kind of tell an underdog story about Microsoft, but it is, and you get excited about it. I mean, I found it really interesting. And the first thing that struck me, the first day when we went back to start production, the first thing we did was just sit down with people and we did audio interviews. We did that long, long day. We interviewed maybe 15 people. And the thing that blew me away was that they were incredibly smart, they were incredibly articulate, and they were incredibly passionate. They believed in this like Alex was Jesus, and they were apostles. And just that passion, to me, was completely transfixing. As a filmmaker, you look for passionate subjects, and in addition to being brilliant and articulate and everything else. So right there, I knew there was all the dough we needed to make something really interesting.
Yeah.
So,
and I would contend that I haven't seen you work on anything yet that you haven't actually found that passion somehow.
I think
which
you
is sort
can
of the Clorox
on
bleach
virtually
thing,
everything. Maybe you can stump me someday, but
yeah. So, I mean, I want to leave time for a couple of questions if anybody has them for Morgan. I'll leave you with one, and you can just ask, you know, hey, does Keith Richards smoke 2 packs a day? Whatever you want. But
yes.
The thing I want to point out that I think is really interesting to me is that as marketers, often documentary we often recommend it much further into the funnel when the consumer is engaged and you're talking to people that really want to know for some aspect of the real story of the product. With Hololens, what's really interesting is we are at the front edge, the very opening of the funnel, because they needed to make the product real to even get people to be willing to engage in thinking about it. And so it's been a fascinating journey to be, like, usually I'm way down the pipe from Chris Younger and Eric and Rebecca doing, all of their social media. But, now we're...
Well, and I think with a company like Microsoft, they have a certain reputation, and they seem like they're just that giant company in Redmond. And when you actually start doing these videos and realizing, no, these are passionate, smart, individual people who you can relate to and you completely understand. It's not like this product just shows up in a box and you don't understand everything that went into it. And when you realize the amount of sacrifice and work and just sweat that went into making this, it's not Microsoft, it's this team of people you identify with. I mean, I think it's one of the things that completely changed my understanding of the company, was just seeing, and I think the company's been changing too, and I think we're trying to reflect that, but showing that these companies aren't just a big black box, but that there are real, smart, creative individuals inside them.
So can we take a couple of questions? Yeah, does anybody have any?
Actually, I got a two-parter. The first is if you have any tips when you're working with a subject who's been media trained, getting them off message. The other is how do you balance authenticity and wanting to go off on tangents with meeting a brand's needs?
Well, the first is, it's related to that idea of just being curious, but oftentimes I'll ask a lot of questions that I know they've never been asked, and they can be mundane questions, if they're talking about a certain subject, just start drilling down on, well, how did that happen? And what was your first day at work like? And tell me, what do you tell your wife when you come home? And just dig deeper and deeper until they start to break from what they're trained. But the other thing is, doing an interview is also a bit of doing a dance. And the subject reflects some of you back at them. So if you go in and you're telling funny stories, they'll tend to give you funny stories back. And if you give really personal stories, they'll tend to give you personal stories back. So and that's just a basic human trait too. So I feel like the more, depending on what you're going for, the more kind of you set the tone of what you're wanting, the more you can get that back. And occasionally, you come across people who can't get away from that media training, but generally those are the worst interviews. I tend to find the people who are the highest up, the people who run companies, the people that are stars, the people who are the real originators, they've maybe had that media training, but they don't care about it anymore. They're beyond it. They're free to be who they want to be. It tends to be the people lower down in the food chain who are a little afraid and who hang on to that media training. And sorry, the second part of the question was?
Balancing the desire to go off on tangents with
tangents.
meeting a brand's needs.
Well, and part of it is just time too. So, rather than trying to get somebody to say something, I've had these discussions many times on commercial jobs, and people want people to use very specific language, and I'll try as many times as I can to get them to say it as they want to say it. And at the end of the day, if we can't get that, then I can go back and try and get them to say specific language. But I'd much rather have people speak from the heart, speak genuinely, and part of that is just spending time with them. I don't like to do short interviews. That can eat up a lot of time. But if I do a 1 or 2 hour interview, that's good. Even if I only end up with 30 seconds worth of material at that interview, I mean, I do that all the time. And in fact, I also throw away a lot of interviews. A film like Best of Enemies, you know, we shot 35 interviews and we threw out 20. And great people. I interviewed Noam Chomsky and Gore Vidal and all these people, and I didn't use those interviews. I think you have to be really disciplined about that. But that's part of the kind of casting process people don't talk about in documentary too, but just figuring out who the best voices are and sticking with those voices.
I was going to point out too, we also evolved that process of the pre-interview, which gives you more time with the subject, and I've noticed that you will sometimes seed terminology that you want them to use in a way because you can when you're talking to them beforehand.
Yeah.
And then we also typically will have a creative director or whomever watching a mock script that we've written beforehand, and Morgan has been very gracious about coming back, and after he gets what he, all of the stuff that he's magical about getting, he'll come back to the green room, to the video village, and go, okay, what else? And then we can go, yeah, you really didn't get the story of the bleach, so.
But sometimes, even looking at the Bruce Springsteen interview from 20 Feet, that was the last interview we shot for that film. And I knew I needed certain things. And that's one of those things where beforehand, you're just kind of chatting. And I laid out a lot of those ideas in the pre-interview with him. And then he spat them back with his beautiful, eloquent, in his beautiful, eloquent, poetic way. And it was great. And certain people are good at that and do that. So part of that is keeping it casual. Even if you have an agenda, never show the agenda to the person. Another thing is, I never look at questions. You know, I write questions. I have pages of questions. We sometimes show questions to the interview subject beforehand, depending. But when I'm in an interview, I never look at questions because to me, it's not an interrogation, it's a conversation.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.